The envelope fit the sewing table so hard that Grace's thread spools rolled off and scattered across the ground. "Pick it up," Chief Bimpekoke said. "Count it, and then we will never see each other again." Grace did not move. She looked at the envelope, then slowly raised her eyes to the woman standing over her, draped in expensive lace, gold choker catching the afternoon sun, 2 houseboys flanking her like she had arrived to buy the entire market. The people nearby had gone quiet. Someone turned off a radio. A woman selling tomatoes 3 stalls down craned her neck. Grace pulled her stool back, crossed her hands on her lap and said calmly, "I don't want your money, ma." Chief Bimpe laughed. It was not a warm sound. "You don't want it." She repeated the word slowly, like she was tasting something strange. "A seamstress sitting under a zinc roof is telling me she does not want 300,000 naira. She leaned forward. "Let me be very clear with you, my dear. My son, Dare, did not go to London for 4 years to come and marry a girl from Agbado Market. Whatever he has been telling you, whatever you think is happening between you two, end it, today." Grace felt heat rise up the back of her neck. Not shame, anger. But she swallowed it slowly, the way Mama Nkechi had taught her. "With respect, ma," she said quietly, "money is not everything." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Chief Bimpe straightened up, picked up the envelope and dropped it directly into Grace's lap. "Keep it anyway. Buy yourself something better to wear." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete, and did not look back once. Grace sat very still until the sound of the car engine faded. Then she placed the envelope under the table, stood up and went back to the blouse she had been hemming before the interruption. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against the fabric and breathed until they stopped. But let's go back to where this started, because stories like this never begin with the villain. They begin with the light. Grace Adeyemi, 24 years old, had been sewing since she was 9. Her grandmother, Mama Nkechi, had pressed her small fingers around the needle and said, "If your hands can create, you will never be helpless." Grace had carried that lesson the way other girls carried lip gloss, always automatically without thinking. Her stall at Agbado Artisan Market was small. 1 machine, a wooden shelf of threads, a cotton she had sewn herself from leftover Ankara fabric. She was not rich, but she was known. Mothers brought her their children's uniforms. Brides brought her their mother's old lace and asked her to make something new from it. She never overcharged. She never turned anyone away. It was on a bright Tuesday morning that a small boy appeared at her store, maybe 7 years old, uniform torn from shoulder to armpit, tears cutting clean lines down his dusty face. "My mama will beat me," he whispered. Grace looked at the coin he was holding out, a 50 naira piece, warm from being clutched too long. She looked at his face. She waved the money away, sat him down on her spare stool, and had the uniform repaired in under 6 minutes. She tucked a cabin biscuit into his school bag and sent him off. He ran without looking back, which meant he had already stopped being afraid. She did not know anyone had watched the whole thing. "How much do you charge for a button?" She turned. A man stood at her store, tall, lean, calm-faced, wearing a plain shirt with a loose cuff button. He was not what she would call flashy, no heavy watch, no loud cologne announcing him before he arrived. Just a quiet kind of confidence that sat comfortably on him like a well-fitted jacket. 50 naira, she said. "I'll pay 100. "I said 50. He smiled. Something in his eyes shifted, like a man who had met very few people in his life who didn't adjust their prices when they saw his shoes. "Dari," he said, extending his hand. "Grace," she said, and took it briefly before reaching for her needle. She sewed the button back on while he stood there making light conversation, asking about the market, about her work, about whether the suya man at the far end was as good as he smelled. She answered without overthinking. When she handed him the cuff he was holding separately, he turned it over, looked at the stitch and said genuinely, "This is clean work." "I know," she said. He laughed, surprised, real, delighted, and that was the beginning. He came back Thursday, then the following Monday. Then he stopped pretending he needed anything repaired and started bringing her cold Fanta and sitting on the edge of her store talking while she walked. Grace let him come. She was careful about it. She watched the way he treated the other traders, whether he talked down to the woman who sold pepper soup nearby, whether he tipped or just smiled. He tipped. He remembered names. He asked the pepper soup woman about her son who wrote WAEC. Grace noticed all of it. She said nothing, but she noticed. They were sharing a plate of fried plantain behind her stall on a quiet Wednesday afternoon when he said, "I want to take you somewhere this weekend. There's a fabric exhibition in the community hall. I think you'd love it." She looked at him sideways. "Is this a date, Dare?" He met her eyes without flinching. "Yes." She looked away, looked back. "Okay." He smiled, and she turned back to her plantain so he wouldn't see that she was smiling too. The community hall was full and warm. Colorful. Fabric hung from the ceiling in great draped waves. Adire, oso-oke, kente, brocade. Grace wore a wine-red dress she had made herself, fitted at the waist, flared at the knee. Her hair was pinned up. She looked, without knowing it, like the most beautiful person in the room. Dare stayed close to her as they moved through the exhibition, watching her face light up at certain fabrics, listening to her explain techniques to him that he had never heard of. He kept thinking, this woman is extraordinary, and he kept not quite finding the right moment to say it out loud. He did not see his mother until it was too late. Chief Bimpe Koke stood near the entrance in deep purple lace, holding a glass of wine, deep in conversation with two other women. She saw Dari first, then she saw Grace beside him, fingers lightly touching a bolt of indigo fabric, laughing at something he had just whispered. The glass in Chief Bimpe's hand lowered slowly. Dari moved towards her, it was unavoidable now, and made the introduction with a steady voice. "Mama, this is Grace. Grace, my mother." Chief Bimpe looked at Grace like a woman looks at something placed on her table that she did not order. "Grace," she said. Just the name, flat, a dismissal shaped like a greeting. Grace smiled. "Good evening, Ma. It's a pleasure." Chief Bimpe took Dari by the arm and pulled him 2 steps away. But the hall was not large and her voice had never learned to be small. "Is this what you went to London for, to come and carry market women to public events?" The nearest conversation stopped. Someone touched their friend's arm. Grace heard every word. She did not break, she did not cry. She straightened her back by about half an inch, set the bolt of fabric down gently, picked up her small purse and said to Dari quietly, "I'll take a cab home. Enjoy your evening." And she walked out. Head up, steps even, not running, not rushing, just walking with all the dignity of a woman who had decided a long time ago that no one else's opinion would ever be the thing that undid her. Dari found her outside, leaning against the wall in the evening air, looking up at the dark sky. "Grace, don't apologize for her," she said. "It's not yours to apologize for." "I'm still sorry," he said. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were bright, not exactly with tears, but with something close to them, pressed back by sheer force of character. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and she let him, and neither of them moved for a moment. Then he kissed her, softly at first, like a question. Then she answered it, and it became something else, something that felt less like a beginning and more like a confirmation of something that had already been true for weeks. When they pulled apart, she pressed her forehead briefly against his jaw and whispered, "Your mother is going to make this very difficult." "I know," he said. "And you are still sure?" He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. "Grace, I have never been more sure of anything." She exhaled slowly, nodded once, and reached for his hand. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on the bell, because this story is only getting started and you do not want to miss what comes next. The Sunday lunch was Chief Bimpe's idea, and everyone at that table knew exactly what it was. The compound was set beautifully, a long table under the shade of the back veranda, good china,
a caterer who had been cooking since 6 in the morning. Chief Binkwe sat at the head like she always did, back straight, wrapper crisp, smiling the particular smile she reserved for occasions where she needed something to go her way. Sonia Bankole arrived in a white dress that probably cost more than Gracie's sewing machine. She was genuinely beautiful, smooth skin, easy laughter, the kind of woman who had been groomed her whole life for exactly this kind of afternoon. She was not unkind. That was the thing that made it worse somehow. Sonia was warm, well-spoken, and completely unaware that she was being used as a weapon. Dare sat across from her and was perfectly polite. He asked about her work. She ran her family's import business. He listened when she spoke. He poured her water when her glass was low, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely, and anyone paying attention could see it. Chief Binkwe was paying attention. After the meal, when Sonia had excused herself to take a call, Chief Binkwe leaned toward Dare with the focused energy of a woman closing a business deal. She is perfect for you. Good family, good sense. She understands your world. Dare folded his napkin slowly. Mama, I'm not interested in Sonia. You haven't given her a chance. I don't need to. He set the napkin down and looked at his mother directly. I know what you are doing. I have known since you sent the invitation, and I need you to hear me clearly. This will not work. Chief Binkwe's jaw tightened. Your father built everything we have from the ground up. He did it so that you would not struggle, so that you could choose from the best, and you want to throw away that for a girl who sews buttons for 50 naira? Something flashed across Dare's face. Not anger, something quieter and more permanent than anger. That girl, he said, standing slowly, is the most genuinely good person I have ever met in my life. And if you cannot see that, then I am very sorry for you, Mama. I really am. He walked inside and left her sitting at the head of her beautiful table, alone. Chief Binkwe arrived at Agbado Market 4 days later. Grace saw the black Mercedes before she saw the woman stepping out of it. She kept sewing. Chief Binkwe approached the stall with the kind of composure that came from decades of getting what she wanted through sheer force of presence. She looked at the stall, at the zinc roof, the single machine, the curtain, and her expression said everything her mouth had not yet opened to see. She placed the envelope on the table. Hard. She said, 300,000 naira. That is more than you will make in this market in a year. Take it. Disappear quietly and there will be no shame in it. Grace looked at the envelope, then at the woman. Then she said in a voice that did not waver even slightly, Ma, with respect, I am not for sale. Chief Binkwe's eye twitched. Every person has a price. Then mine is not money, Grace said. Grace placed the envelope to the side of the table, away from her workspace, as though it were a piece of fabric she had no use for. I think you should go now, Ma. Something moved across Chief Binkwe's face, something that, in a different woman, might have been the beginning of respect, but she covered it fast, pulled herself upright and said, You will regret this stubbornness. Maybe, Grace said simply, but I will regret the other thing more. That night, Grace sat on the step outside the small house she shared with Mama Nkechi, knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing in particular. Mama Nkechi came and sat beside her without being asked, the way old women do when they already know what the silence is made of. She came today, Grace said. I know. She brought money. I know that too. Mama Nkechi was quiet for a moment. What did you do? I sent her away. Mama Nkechi nodded slowly, as if this was the only answer she had expected and the only one she approved. She reached over and covered Grace's hand with her own, a hand that was older, rougher, mapped with years of its own labor. Mama, Grace said quietly, do you think I'm being foolish, holding on to this when his mother hates me so much? Mama Nkechi turned to look at her granddaughter. Her eyes, always warm, carried something else tonight. A heaviness, a knowing, something just behind the warmth that had nowhere yet to go. "You are not being foolish," she said carefully. "You are being exactly who you are. And who you are has always been more than enough, more than even you know." Grace searched her grandmother's face. "What does that mean?" Mama Nkechi patted her hand twice and stood up slowly. "It means go inside and rest. Some truths have their own time." 3 weeks passed. Dari and Grace fell deeper into each other the way people do when outside forces are pressing in from every direction. Quickly, seriously, without the luxury of taking things slow. He came to the market every morning before his meetings. She saved him the last piece of whatever she was eating for lunch. They argued about small things. He thought she undercharged for her work. She told him to mind his business. And the argument always ended the same way, with him pulling her close somewhere behind the store and kissing her till she forgot what she was defending. One evening, he showed up with a small box. Inside was a sewing kit, the kind Grace could never justify buying for herself. Proper tools, good quality, with a note that simply said, "For the cleanest stitches in Ebutte-Ola." She pressed the note to her chest and looked at him with something in her eyes that was beyond gratitude and not quite yet the word they hadn't said. "You are too much," she said softly. "Not enough," he said, and he meant it in all the ways the words could carry. She reached up and pulled him down by the collar and kissed him right there in the open market, and she did not care who was watching. 2 women selling fabric nearby burst into loud teasing laughter. A man passing with a wheelbarrow raised his fist and cheered. Grace laughed at Dari's mouth and felt for the first time in a long time that the world was fundamentally on her side. Then Chief Bimpe collapsed. It happened at her office on a Thursday afternoon. Her assistant heard a crash and found her on the floor beside her desk, breathing but barely responsive. By the time the ambulance reached Ebutte-Ola General Hospital, her blood pressure had crashed and her doctors were using words that shut a room down fast. Both kidneys, chronic failure, advancing rapidly. She needed a transplant and she needed it soon. Dari called Grace from the hospital corridor, voice tighter than she had ever heard him. She could hear the strip lights humming behind him, the distant beep of machines. "Is she stable?" Grace asked immediately. "For now, but Grace..." He stopped. She could hear him trying to find somewhere to put what he was carrying. "They are saying months, maybe less if a match doesn't come through."
"Okay," Grace said quietly. "I'm coming." "You don't have to, Dari." Her voice was steady and clear. "I'm coming." The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and something older. Fear, maybe, or the particular stillness that arrives when a powerful person is suddenly powerless. Chief Bimpe lay in the bed with monitors attached to her arms and the television off, which told Grace more about her state than anything the nurses had said. This was a woman who always had noise around her, always had motion. The silence was not restful. It was defeat. Family members came and went to be tested for donor compatibility. Dari was tested first, not a match. 3 cousins followed. 2 aunties flew in from Abuja. A nephew came from Port Harcourt. One by one, the results came back negative, and each one pressed the situation a little more urgently against the wall. Grace sat in the corridor outside watching Dari pace, watching him hold himself together in that careful way men do when they are absolutely terrified and cannot afford to show it. She stood up and walked to the nurse's station. "I'd like to be tested," she said, "as a potential donor." The nurse looked at her. "Are you a family member?" Grace paused. "I'm someone who wants to help." The results took 48 hours. Grace was a perfect match. The consultant said it twice, as though he too needed to hear it again to believe it. Rare blood type, full compatibility across every marker they tested. In 20 years of practice, he told the room he had seen this kind of match maybe 4 times. Dari stared at Grace in the corridor outside the consultant's office. He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes were doing something complicated. Gratitude and guilt and awe all arriving at the same time with nowhere to cue. "Grace," he started. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't make it complicated. She is your mother. I can help. That is the whole thing. She treated you like nothing. I know what she did." Grace reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart, and held it there and said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. Comment below and let us know. Would you have done what Grace did? Drop your answer down there and don't forget to like this video. It truly helps us more than you know. Mama Nkechi came to the hospital on the second day. Grace had not asked her to come, but old women who have carried secrets for decades develop a sense for when the time has finally run out, and Mama Nkechi had felt it the moment Grace called to say she was a perfect match. She had sat with that information for one full night, turning it over in her hand like a stone she had been holding for 30 years, and by morning she knew. She walked into the hospital with her wrapper tied firmly, her head tied straight, and the expression of a woman who had decided something irreversible. Grace saw her coming down the corridor and stood up from the plastic chair she had been sitting on for the better part of 2 days. "Mama, you didn't need to. I needed to," Mama Nkechi said simply. She looked at the door to Chief Bimpe's room. "Is she awake?" "In and out." "I need to speak with her." She looked at Grace, then at Dari standing nearby. "Alone, both of you wait outside." Grace opened her mouth, closed it. She had known her grandmother long enough to recognize the tone that meant there was no version of this conversation where she got a vote. Mama Nkechi entered the room quietly and closed the door behind her. Chief Bimpe was awake, propped slightly against the pillow, looking smaller than anyone who had ever met her in full power could have imagined. The gold jewelry was gone, the lace wrapper replaced by a hospital gown. Without all of it, she looked like what she actually was, a 60-year-old woman who was frightened and tired and running out of time. She looked at Mama Nkechi and something passed across her face. Recognition, faint and uncertain, the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in decades. "I know you," Chief Bimpe said slowly. Mama Nkechi sat down in the chair beside the bed without being invited. "You should. I worked on the Adeyemi Cocoa Estate for 11 years. I was there the year your husband's family sent the lawyers." The room went very still. Chief Bimpe's eyes sharpened despite the exhaustion behind them. "That was a legal matter. The land belonged to my family," Mama Nkechi said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "My daughter and her husband had no money for lawyers. They had no connections. They had no one to stand in that room and fight for what was theirs. Your husband knew that when he sent those papers." She paused. "I am not here to reopen that wound today. I am here because of something else entirely." Chief Bimpe waited, staring at the ceiling. "The girl in that corridor," she said, "the one your son loves, the one who came to this hospital to offer her kidney to a woman who tried to pay her off like a servant." She leaned forward slightly. "That is my granddaughter. She is the only surviving heir to the Adeyemi estate. The land your late husband's family took is worth more today than either of us can calculate." She sat back. "And she does not know any of this. She has never known. I kept it from her because I did not want bitterness to grow where kindness had taken root." The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily into the silence. Chief Bimpe stared at the ceiling for a long moment. When she looked back, her eyes were wet, not spilling over, just carrying more than they had room for. "She knew none of this," she said quietly. "It was not a question." "Nothing," Mama Nkechi confirmed. "She came here because it is who she is, not because of the land, not because of your son, because she is Grace." Outside in the corridor, Grace was pacing slowly, arms folded, while Dari watched her from the wall he was leaning against. "You are going to wear a path in that floor," he said. "What is she saying in there?" "I don't know." "Dari?" "Grace." He pushed off the wall and came to stand in front of her, stopping her mid-pace. He put both hands on her face, tilted it up gently. "Yes." She looked at him, exhaled. "Together. Together," he repeated, and kissed her forehead and held her there against him until she stopped being rigid with worry. When Mama Nkechi came out, her face was quiet and unreadable in the way of someone who had just set down something heavy. She took Grace's hands in both of hers and held them for a moment. "There are things I need to tell you," she said.
things I should have told you a long time ago. But first, she glanced towards the door. She wants to speak with you alone. Grace looked at the door, then back at her grandmother. Is this about the land, Mama? The estate? Mama Nkechi's eyes widened slightly. How did you know? You said some truths have their own time, Grace said softly. And the way you looked at me that night, I have been turning it over ever since. She squeezed her grandmother's hands once, then let go. We will talk after. Grace pushed the door open and stepped inside. Chief Bimpe looked at her the moment she entered, really looked at her the way she had never allowed herself to before. Without the armor of her title and her money and her opinion about who was good enough for what, she was just a sick woman in a hospital bed looking at a young woman who had every reason to walk away and had chosen not to. Grace pulled the chair close and sat down. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had arrived somewhere neither of them expected to be, and were both trying to find the honest version of themselves inside the moment. Chief Bimpe spoke first. I put money on your table, she said. I told you were beneath my son. I went to your market and treated you like something he had dragged in from the road.
Her voice was steady, but it was costing her something to keep it that way. And you came here anyway? Yes, ma, Grace said. Why? Grace was quiet for a moment. Because if someone can help save a life and chooses not to, that stays with them forever. She looked at Chief Pimpe steadily. I did not want to carry that. And she paused. I did not want Dare to lose his mother when it was in my hands to prevent it. Chief Pimpe closed her eyes. When she opened them, the wetness had spilled over, just slightly, just at the corners, and she did not move to wipe it. I have been wrong, she said, about you, about what matters. She exhaled slowly. I spent my whole life measuring people by what they owned and where they came from. I thought that was wisdom. I thought I was protecting my son. She shook her head. I was protecting nothing. I was just afraid. Grace reached out and took the older woman's hand. It surprised them both. You are not a bad person, ma, Grace said quietly. You are a proud person who has not had a reason to stop and look until now. Chief Pimpe laughed, a short, wet, broken sound that was more real than anything Grace had ever heard from her. That is a very kind way to say what you could have said much harder. I know, Grace said simply. The surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days between, something shifted in the Coca household that could not be fully explained but could be felt by everyone inside it. Chief Pimpe stopped making calls. She started asking questions instead, about Grace's work, about Mama Nkechi, about the estate, about what Grace had known and when. She listened in a way she had not listened to anything in years. On the day before the surgery, she called her lawyer. The Adeyemi Cocoa Estate, the land, the farmhouse, the full documented title was to be transferred back to Grace, legally, completely, no conditions attached. When Dare told Grace, she went very still. She doesn't have to do that, Grace said. She knows, Dare said. That's why she's doing it. The surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days between, something shifted in the Coca household that could not be fully explained but could be felt by everyone inside it. Chief Pimpe stopped making calls. She started asking questions instead, about Grace's work, about Mama Nkechi, about the estate, about what Grace had known and when. She listened in a way she had not listened to anything in years. On the day before the surgery, she called her lawyer. The Adeyemi Cocoa Estate, the land, the farmhouse, the full documented title was to be transferred back to Grace, legally, completely, no conditions attached. When Dare told Grace, she went very still. She doesn't have to do that, Grace said. She knows, Dare said. That's why she's doing it. The surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days between, something shifted in the Coca household that could not be fully explained but could be felt by everyone inside it. Chief Pimpe stopped making calls. She started asking questions instead, about Grace's work, about Mama Nkechi, about the estate, about what Grace had known and when. She listened in a way she had not listened to anything in years. On the day before the surgery, she called her lawyer. The Adeyemi Cocoa Estate, the land, the farmhouse, the full documented title was to be transferred back to Grace, legally, completely, no conditions attached. When Dare told Grace, she went very still. "She doesn't have to do that," Grace said. "She knows," Dare said. "That's why she's doing it."
The surgery lasted 6 hours. Grace came out of the anesthetic slowly, the way you surface from deep water, aware of sound before anything else, then light, then the weight of her own hand. The first thing she felt was another hand wrapped around hers. She turned her head. Dare was in the chair beside her bed, still in the same shirt he had been wearing when she went in, his elbow on the mattress, his forehead resting against their joined hands. He had been asleep sitting up, but the moment she moved, he was awake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she managed. He raised her hand and pressed his mouth against her knuckles, not a romantic gesture exactly, more the gesture of a person who had been sitting in terror for 6 hours and needed to confirm with his lips what his eyes were already telling him. "She's okay," he said. "Surgery was clean. They are calling it a complete success." Grace exhaled, long and slow and deep, and closed her eyes for a moment. "Good," she whispered. 3 months later, on a Saturday so bright it felt like the whole sky had been freshly laundered, Ebutte-Ola gathered for the introduction ceremony of Dare Coca and Grace Adeyemi. The compound was covered in orange and gold fabric that rippled in the breeze. There was music, there was food, there was the particular joyful noise of a community that had watched a story unfold and had opinions about every chapter of it. Children ran between the legs of dancing adults. Mama Nkechi sat in the place of highest honor, a full gele on her head, laughing at something the woman beside her had said with the abandon of someone who had finally put down a weight that was never meant to be permanent. Grace came out in deep burnt gold and amber, wrapper tied perfectly, her natural hair crowned with small gold pins. She was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with the fabric or the jewelry. It was the radiance of a woman who had been tested hard and had come through it knowing exactly who she was. Dare watched her cross the compound toward him and forgot for a full 10 seconds to breathe. When she reached him, he leaned close and said against her ear, "I told you the first day. Clean work." She laughed and pressed her hand briefly against his chest, the same gesture, the same place, and he covered it with his. Chief Bimpe Coca rose to address the gathering. She stood without her usual performance, no commanding sweep of her eyes around the room, no waiting for total silence before she would begin. She just stood and spoke, and her voice, for perhaps the first time in decades, was completely unguarded. "I have been a proud woman all my life. I confused pride with wisdom, and I confused wealth with worth. I looked at this young woman and saw a seamstress at a market store, and I decided that told me everything." She paused. "It told me nothing. It told me nothing at all." She looked at Grace directly. The richest person in this compound today has a scar on her side from where she gave cut of herself so that I could live. She did not do it for the land. She did not do it for my son. She did it because that is who she is. Her voice, just barely, thickened. And I will spend whatever years she has given me back trying to deserve even a fraction of that kind of character. The compound erupted. Grace stood in the middle of all of it, the music and the ululation and the tears and the laughter, and felt Dare's hand find hers in the noise. She held on. That is the end of today's story. If this moved you, if you felt every single moment of Grace's journey, please like this video right now. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything to this channel. And before you go,
Drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We have viewers from Nigeria, the UK, the US, Canada, and beyond. Let us know where you are and what part of this story hit you the hardest. Subscribe if you are not yet part of this family. Every week, we bring you stories like this one. Stories about love, strength, dignity, and the truth that character will always outlast circumstance. Grace knew that. Now you do too.